Hi, this is Jim Fisher, Senior Camera Analyst at PC Mag. I'm in Sedona, Arizona, shooting with the new Sony a7R Mark III. If you're not familiar with the a7R III, it is, in some specifications, a minor upgrade to the a7R II, in that the cameras use the same 42 megapixel full-frame image sensor. If the sensor's the same, you're saying, why should I buy the new camera? Why should I be interested in this one? Well, there are changes all over the place. The body style is a little bit different. It feels very similar in the hand, but now there are two memory card slots. There's a much larger battery that you can shoot with all day. There's a little focus joystick to change your focus point, which is a nice addition inherited from the A9. The LCD is a touch screen and tilts up and down, but it's not a very angled display, so it doesn't face all the way forward for video use. The other big enhancements are inside the camera. It's the same sensor, but it's a new processor, so Sony promises an extra stop of dynamic range for shooting raw images, up to 15 stops. The autofocus system is also vastly improved. It's not on the same level as the A9. It doesn't cover the entire sensor like that autofocus system does, but it covers a good portion of the sensor. The eye AF and tracking AF is very quick and accurate, and it can shoot at 10 frames per second with a mechanical shutter. The A9, Sony's high-speed sports camera, uses an electronic shutter to hit 20 frames per second. When you use that camera with its mechanical shutter, it's only 5 FPS. So you've actually got an advantage here for studio work when you want to sync with a strobe at up to 1/252. The in-body 5-axis stabilization system is also a bit stronger, up to 5.5 stops of compensation. I saw the benefits of the improved stabilization system when shooting some aerial video and stills from a hot air balloon.
We're going to go up in a hot air balloon at sunrise and take some landscape shots, see how well the stabilization system in the camera handles shooting from an aerial platform. I'll be doing some video from the air as well. I'm shooting with a 24 to 70mm G Master lens, which does not have its own stabilization, so all the stabilization we're going to see is the in-body 5-axis system.
The balloon's a pretty smooth ride to begin with, but I was shooting with a 24 to 70mm G Master lens. It does not have its own stabilization system, so it's relying entirely on the in-body. I shot a lot of 4K video from the air, and my results were quite smooth. I couldn't have a tripod in the balloon, so I was hand-holding, and the stabilization system removed all kinds of jitters from the footage. I still had to deal with the occasional bumper or weird motion, and that's because I'm not the best at hand-holding the camera and recording video. If my body moves a little bit, the camera moves, and the stabilization system isn't going to eliminate that. Shooting from a helicopter is a different story. The footage I captured during an open-door flight shows a good amount of shake, although it's minimized when the aircraft is holding in place. I chalk this up to the movement of the helicopter, wind coming in through the open doors, and the fact that I was a bit terrified during my first open-door flight. Even though the out-of-camera footage is shaky, you can use editing software like Premiere Pro to steady it. It's more effective at doing that than if the footage hadn't been stabilized at all.
One of the new features of the camera is pixel shift resolution. This requires a sturdy tripod. It takes 4 exposures, shifting the sensor 1 pixel between each one, so you're sampling color at every photo site for additional resolution. I'm trying out some landscape photography of that here. I'm going to insert that into the video and show you a pixel level crop, of the shot with it and without it, to show you the difference in detail it's resolving.
This is something we've seen in other cameras. Pixel shift is available in the Pentax K1 full frame, in the Olympus OMD series, as well as in the new Panasonic G9. Sony's taken a similar tact as Pentax in implementing pixel shift. The camera captures 4 exposures, moving the sensor by 1 pixel between each. What that does is it samples color at each pixel site. Normally, a color camera has a filter array over the sensor that interpolates colors. There's a grid of red, green, and blue sensitive pixels. So if you're shooting something that's textured and is mainly red, you're not going to sample the red color at every pixel site. This is why cameras like the Leica M monochrome have an advantage in resolution. They don't have that color filter. They just capture light and detail. One big difference between the a7R III pixel shift and the Pentax implementation is the a7R III doesn't process the files in camera. You have to use external desktop software to combine them. I expect pixel shift to be a big hit for landscape photographers who want the most detail out of their shots. It's really great if you're on a tripod and you have a static subject. It does not work if you're hand holding the camera or if you've got moving action. In terms of features for pro videographers, the a7R III has some improvements. The a7R III adds S-Log 3, which is a flat color profile and Sony says delivers 14 stops of dynamic range for video. It also has hybrid log gamma 3, which is a Sony HDR format, which lets you shoot HDR footage, not have to grade it, but it only lets you plug the camera in or view the footage on a Sony TV that supports the format, so that's a little bit limited as far as distribution goes. You can shoot 4K with the full frame width of the 35mm sensor or an APS-C crop mode. I've noticed the Super 35 crop is a little bit crisper, a little bit sharper, and that's because the camera takes a 5K frame and downsamples it when you're using in that mode. It's very easy to get lost in Sony's menu system. The a7R III uses the same system from the A9, which is definitely better than previous iterations of the camera, but it's still pretty daunting. There's some functions in here that you'll probably want to use often that are buried in the menu, like switching from the Super 35 crop to the full frame for video. I assigned a custom button for that because I was trying to go back and forth between the clips to check out the difference in the quality. One thing I didn't like is that when I assigned that button to change the video area of capture, it also did for stills. So if I wasn't careful, I'd be shooting Super 35 video, go to take a still, and it would only be an 18 megapixel APS-C image frame. Despite the menu shortcomings, the camera is very customizable. Pretty much any button can be reassigned. So if you're familiar with the Sony system, you'll want to sit down for a few hours when you get the camera and set it up to your liking. If you're not, I recommend taking it out to shoot for a bit, find out what features you want to use, what buttons you want to have them accessible via, and then go back and set it up after that. One of the things the a7R Mark III inherits from the A9 is the My Menu function. My Menu is a customizable page at the end of the main menu system where you can add things that you use quite often. It's a big plus because there are pages and pages and pages of options in the camera. Despite having such an extensive menu system and seemingly having so much built into it, there's some little things that are missing. There's no built-in intervalometer, so you need to invest in an external device if you want to use the a7R III for time-lapse. This is something we see built into Nikon SLRs like the D850, which is probably its closest competition as far as functionality and resolution goes. I was also shooting some astrophotography last night, and there's no option for timed exposure. I can set bulb exposure, which makes me hold down the shutter button for the duration of exposure, or set exposures up to 30 seconds, but there's no timed exposure mode. If you're not familiar with timed exposure mode, that's when you press the shutter button once to open the shutter, and again, a second time to close it.
If you want to make long exposures or shoot time lapses, you can invest in a third-party intervalometer. I used a $50 Velo Shutterboss 2, which plugs in via USB to capture the 15-minute exposure you're seeing now.
In terms of connectivity, the camera has built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. It also has physical connections for an external microphone, 3.5mm, as well as headphones for monitoring. It has micro USB 2.0 and USB-C connections. The two USB ports give you a little bit of versatility in powering and tethering the camera for desktop control. You can use the fast USB-C port to transfer images to your computer as you shoot them, and the micro USB 2.0 port to power the camera. Studio photographers still using PC Sync to control strobes will be happy to know that this camera has a port. There's also a micro HDMI port. Most people are familiar with HDMI from their TV, but that's not what it's really used for here. Instead, if you're a serious videographer, you can have an external field recorder and send out uncompressed footage from the camera right to your recorder. That's going to get you better quality than recording to a memory card, even though the a7R III does record pretty strong quality, 100 megabits per second at 4K. There are dual memory card slots, both SDXC, but only one of the slots is compatible with UHS 2 memory cards. You can use a UHS 2 card in either slot, but you'll only gain its speed advantages if you use it in slot 1. What I do in the field is use the second slot as a spare. I carry two cards with me in camera, and when one fills up, I'll just swap the other card to slot 1. That lets me have the convenience of having two cards in the camera, but not sacrifice speed when one fills up. This is especially true if you're shooting in burst, as you'll have to wait for the slower card to catch up to the faster one. If you shot with the a7R Mark II, you knew you had to carry several W batteries with you to get through a full day of shooting. They just didn't have enough power to keep the camera running for long periods of time. The new Z battery, which we first saw in the A9, blows that away. I managed to shoot hundreds of images, plus about a half an hour of 4K video, and I still had about 60% battery life left. Battery life will vary, of course. If you've got the camera on and you're not using it to take images, you won't capture as many images. Conversely, if you're shooting 10 frames per second burst mode and you're shooting very liberally, you'll be able to capture a bunch of images before the battery drains.
We finished up our field testing of the a7R III and walked away happy, but we haven't yet gotten the camera into the lab. When we do, we'll run formal tests and publish our final verdict on PC Mag. In the meantime, please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube feed for all of our latest tech and camera coverage.